They are the Red Angels of the Dolomites, the Alpine rescue team. Before dawn, emergency doctor Lydia Rauch and her team check their kit. The Alpine is a non-profit association and has won 3 rescue helicopters in South Tyrol. Lydia is an anaesthetist. In an emergency, stabilization of breathing and circulation is fundamental. There are over 30 Italian and German doctors working in rotation for the Alpine. Lydia is originally from Bavaria in Germany and has been working here for 15 years.
It's usual here for your first time to be a real jumping in at the deep end. And in my case, it was a rope climbing incident at a glacier crevasse on the Marmolada mountain. And I can remember very well how I stood there at the edge in my crampons with a helicopter hovering next to me, the patient ready to be hoisted up and me seeing the Fadaya lake below. And I thought, wow, if I get blown off, I'll land in that. I can remember that all too well. It was also so impressive, which I hadn't considered before, of just how much a blast of wind the helicopter generates and how hard it is to work underneath that.
Until now, it's been quiet. But as is often the case, the moment food is on the table, the emergency siren sounds. A woman has fallen while hiking. There is always a crew of 4 in the helicopter: the pilot, the winch operator, an emergency doctor and a mountain rescuer. They exit the helicopter in mid-flight. Landing here is impossible. The casualty has sustained fractures and must be treated as fast as possible. Within minutes, they're able to call the helicopter and begin the rescue.
On one hand, you do grow a thick skin when having done this work for many years. Many people think our feelings are blunted, but it's not like that, because it's impossible to see the terrible or shocking things that we do without it getting under your skin. What you never get used to is the suffering of relatives, people's fear or despair, a woman who sees her husband fall, or a child who sees its father have a heart attack and need to be resuscitated. Things like that are always going to affect us.
The Dolomites, named after the geologist Deodat de Dolomieu, who first explored their rocks. They lie in the easternmost north of Italy, with 1/3 of them in South Tyrol. Highlights amongst them include Lake Prags, the 3 peaks of Lavaredo, Val Gardena and the Val Badia, where Ladin is spoken.
This is Radio Gruden with Martina Ria. This is Ladin music, and with me here is Anita Obwex.
Anita, perché chanza tu per ladin?
Why do you sing in the Ladin language?
Ma io sam chanti ien per ladin perché ricale dicessi le lingazzi
Because it's the language of my heart.
Le prime lingazzi che imparei
It's my mother tongue.
Mia famiglia, mia da casa.
It reminds me of my family and my home. It comes spontaneously to my lips and works well when sung, given its many vowels. It can easily turn into a melody and, even when spoken, is very melodic.
Anita Obvegs is very much at home in Valbadia and has made music since her childhood with her father Zenzo. Ladin is only spoken in a small number of valleys, but as a small region, South Tyrol has won expert status in how it handles its minorities, and the Ladins have considerable lobbying power. Ladin is the third official language and is on the curriculum of many schools.
The mountains have done much to shape our culture, songs, and the way we think.
I
think the Ladin language only exists at all because our valleys are so narrow and secluded, and so removed from external influences.
Anita composes new songs with her band in the holidays. She studies in Vienna and, like many people from the valleys, splits her time between the worlds of the mountains and the big city.
Sometimes I find it wonderful and feel at home with the huge expanse, the mountains, my friends, and then I start feeling trapped, and it's time to go.
Pilots Marco and Gabriel Kostner. In addition to their work for the airborne rescue, the brothers run a company that flies freight. Requests sometimes force them to split the workload. Marco flies in the morning and Gabriel in the afternoons.
Look at the sea of clouds today. Amazing. The mountains look like ships on an ocean.
Marco is on a mission for the Italian Alpine Association. Flight assistants Ivo and Bean are on the fueling platform ahead of him and prepare everything. A quick briefing and they're ready to go. They need to put up an Alpine hut at an altitude of over 3,000 meters. This shelter for mountaineers is getting old and needs to be replaced. The old hut will be demolished and building material for the new one be flown to the mountain.
When flying freight, altitude plays an important role. For example, at 3,000 meters, you can lift 200 to 300 kilos less payload and have less power, and that's a problem. There's always a limit to the weight you can and cannot lift every day with every load. It's extremely important to estimate this well. Things can move fast and you have to react equally fast. You can't take risks, although you have to be a little daring or you just can't do it. So 100 times every day you need to find the balance between what you can and cannot do.
The foundations for a cable car mast on the Forcella del Sassolungo need to be reset with concrete. There's no way a truck can make it up here.
Flying freight is not simple and needs a lot of practice. If you don't fly for a week, you really notice it. The cargo needs to be steady and not swing. You have maybe 800, 900, 1,000 kilos underneath you, and that kind of cargo is real work. You can't let it land heavily. This is a job that requires a gentle touch. Here you always have a cable below you. You're close to the ground, and the electricity, the wires and the rails are extremely dangerous. If you forget that for one moment, it's a catastrophe. You have to be completely focused.
The Capanna Fassa shelter on the Piz Boe. This hut is not accessible by car. Food and refuse collection is carried out by helicopter.
Flying is unique. You're basically free. You decide when, what, where. And flying over the Dolomites is something completely out of this world. I actually studied sculpture and was doing that for a few years. But we always flew kites every Saturday and Sunday, which was even more beautiful. We took apart the motor from my brother's snowboard and built motor kites, which were just amazing to fly. That was our dream job.
Sculpture has deep traditional roots in Val Gardena and many dynasties of religious image sculptors, the reason why most summit crosses are monumental works of art. Wood is found in abundance, and in winter, carving often provided supplementary income for mountain families. For them, the forests are a source of inspiration. Aron Demetz and his children are on the search for resin, which he needs as material in the workshop. Look, this resin is beautiful. It's the lifeblood of the trees and bleeds out if they're damaged. It seals the wound and forms new bark. It's just like my sculptures, which I carve with the chainsaw. Aron is intimately linked with nature and his homeland. His artistic work is defined by the landscape around him. I do believe it has a certain raw quality, which is perhaps given life from the mountains and a reflection of how people here live. He wanted to be a dentist, but found no openings and ended up studying sculpture. He also carved countless saints. He hasn't given up on this tradition, but has deliberately chosen to follow his own path. You need to adapt to the dictates of a changing reality and languages like TV and the internet, mediums that move very fast. And you need to find a way in which to communicate. With traditional saint sculptures, it'll be difficult. You need to be able to interpret them in a way that fits the mediums of today. That's very important. You need to be able to communicate with your contemporaries in both a modern or contemporary way, with both languages. Since the time his sculptures were seen at the Venice Biennale, he has entered the international art world. Whether in New York, Mexico, or Taipei, Aron has gone global. But his sculptures have provoked some agitation in the more conservative inhabitants of the valley, who have condemned them as being too burnt, too naked, too unusual. They have reported him to both the mayor and the police. One compares oneself with these figures. One sees oneself therein and somehow relates oneself to them. When you see a Madonna, you see one kind of figure. When you see a Christ, you see something else. A naked figure, giving birth to a child, even be it male that's giving birth, that you instantly compare with yourself. But it's not about a direct comparison, it's about a story, an idea. With a 3D scanner, Aron takes images of the models and edits them on a computer. Sculpture in the digital age. The machine is controlled via the computer and produces that which the artist envisions. Aron focuses on the surface of the sculpture. It is what transmits his ideas. This machine has produced an alienated, animal-like form through sculpting certain parts myself, I can bring something more human, something very gentle back into it. The upright posture of the sculptures, which should stand as trees in a forest, is important to him. I always draw a comparison between the life of a tree with that of a person, trying always to bring something from the character of the tree into the human and vice versa. The figure then becomes something that carries an intrinsic value. Moss always grows in the shade, that's to say on the northern side of the forest. What I like is that a figure or a person also has a sunny and a dark side. Zeiser Alm. At the end of the 1980s, in the Sanon hut, the Alpine helicopter rescue service began. Raphael Kostner has lived here since his youth. In the hut, there were only joists and no wall cladding. Wind would blow through. I built a bed out of 4 old planks and put an old mattress on it. One day I woke up and there was a pyramid of snow next to my head. There was no water, no electricity, no way up here, nothing. It's grown very slowly. It's just nice when you can build something. Together with his wife Maddalena, Raphael has built a blossoming guest inn. Today, they run the place with the grown children. In former times, the hut was the rescue crew's base. When we began here, this was the control room. The kitchen was still outside, and there was a window here. There was where we set up the console with 1 telephone and 2 radios, and that was it. When a call came in, we all had to jump to it, Maddalena and everyone else. Mountain rescue took priority over everything. No guest was more important. The helicopter starts up right next to the terrace. The Sanon hut in Alpine's early days. The association was formed by merging several mountain rescue teams, and the first missions were unforgettable. I was so excited. If I see someone now, someone young who comes and flies with us for the first time, and they're trembling, I'm really not surprised. I was exactly like that. It was so incredible for me, so emotional. To be able to be on top of the Sassolungo with a helicopter in just a few minutes, it was just amazing. Yet even today, pilots are unable to calculate every possible risk.
You know, there's someone up there who needs help and it's hard. You should get there as soon as possible. But there's situations where you simply have to come back. That's really hard. Even more difficult than it is to try and get there. But you have another 4 people on board. And that's why sometimes you just have to say no.
The team have been called to an accident at over 3,000 meters. Yet again, emergency doctor Lydia Rauch and her colleague have to hover low, this time over a boulder field. The pilot looks for a suitable landing site. There, it waits for news of the accident location. It really isn't the way that every mission is routine. There's always a lot of inner tension. You need to think and make choices in a very short space of time. Missions like this repeatedly train the rescuers throughout the year. Working with a helicopter is far from safe and requires a lot of experience. Without help by air, a rescue can take hours, which can mean the difference between life or death. Lake Prags. The seaplane is for filming the Italian TV series Un Passo dal Cielo, a ratings hit in Italy thanks to the backdrop of the Dolomites and its principal character. Hollywood star Terence Hill. As Forester Pietro, he needs to solve crimes. The Wild West in the Dolomites. It is similar to me, even though the landscape is very different. But I have my horse. It's adventure, un'avventura. When the producer said action, I said to him, I'll only play the forester if you give me a horse. His mother was German and his father Italian. Terence Hill spent his childhood near Dresden in Germany. Today he lives in Umbria and helped pick this location. It was very emotional for me as a child to have my father telling me about the Dolomites. Back then there were no lifts and he'd walk 50 kilometers from hut to hut.
50 chilometri da Hütte zu Hütte. Mi diceva,
he knew the names of every mountain, and coming here is like a homage to my family and their life amongst the peaks.
La mia famiglia e l'amore che lui aveva per la montagna.
Mountain guide Erwin Steiner plays the Hollywood stars double in climbing scenes. But when the production company first asked the South Tyrol native, he rejected them. Now, I have to be honest and admit that I understand very little about film business and also actors. Because when I heard the name Terence Hill, whom I know from the great westerns that we saw when we were young, I said that I'd work as a mountain guide or Alpine guide, but that I'd send a colleague who spoke English their way. I didn't want to do it with my pidgin English. I thought he was American.
Ich war ja einfach der Meinung, der ist ein Amerikaner.
South Tyrol supports filming with considerable sums. The film fund aims to boost the local economy. They instructed me to find the stuntmen. But once they began filming, we discovered that even though they may have been good stuntmen, they simply couldn't climb, after which the company quickly got rid of them, so now it's our job. So that it's not noticeable on television that the Hollywood star has a double, Erwin Steiner must also wear his shoes, even though they're too big. Trekking shoes, that's to say normal walking boots, are completely unsuitable for use here, although they're still useful. I've already been filmed having to climb in cowboy boots.
Action. Azione! Col corpo proprio, esatto, così, bravi!
Forester Pietro is meant to save a boisterous adolescent.
Eccolo qua, brava, brava.
The difference between climbing shown on TV and reality for me is simply that in film, it's the dangerous and spectacular part that's shown. Something always needs to happen, and the real beauty, the real reason why you go to the mountains very rarely comes across. For Terence Hill, there is, of course, a happy ending. Forester Pietro is summoned to Nepal and embarks upon new adventures. The Three Peaks of Lavaredo. The northern walls are more than perpendicular, and overhangs, thrilling for climbers, but also risky. Two injured in the Three Peaks, the mission could hardly be more difficult. The Three Peaks are simply unique. They're so huge, when you fly into them, you feel how small you really are. The helicopter cannot reach those injured. The overhang is most extreme at the western pinnacle, and the rotor would impact against the rock. It's complicated for the men, who need to prepare a rescue with a fixed rope on the ground. The longer the cable, the more difficult the maneuver, and here, a good 130 meters are needed. The attachment to the helicopter is secured twice. Mountain rescuer Artur Zeiwald is hanging from the rope. He has to retrieve the wounded from the rock face. The helicopter gets further, gets smaller, and then you look up there and you think, oh, it's getting higher. Then it pulls you up in the air and somehow you're just hovering, spinning like a carousel. As soon as I'm secured to the injured person, it's the critical moment because they're attached to the rock face and everything is then connected. The chain, the rock face, the individual, rescuers and the helicopter. When the rescue is over, in practical terms, it's still not finished for me. Coming back down is actually much more difficult than up there on the rock face, because you have no reference point and don't notice how fast you're approaching the ground. This time, it was just an exercise, but the real thing has happened before. You do wonder why you have to risk everything for two crazy people. The risk that I might strike the rock face or that we won't be able to maintain height. That is there and we need to live with it. But I took myself into mountain rescue in order to help people and not in order to be fearful. They go in search of clues. Sigrid Visthaler and her teammates focus on the First World War and the mountain fronts which ran through the Dolomites. Her home village Sexton lay in a section that was fiercely fought over. At that time, South Tyrol was still part of Austria. Sigrid's great-grandfather was a soldier at the Croda Rossa of Sesto. The four want to climb up high to where former positions lay. Sigrid's source of information is her great-grandfather's diary.
For me, it was very exciting to see that real, everyday stories were recorded. I could immerse myself in a world of 100 years ago and really follow what happened every day. My great-grandfather dared, in spite of the censorship, to be critical and open with his feelings.
Karl Außerhofer was a farmer and had a wife and children. 21st of August, 1915. Violent grenades and shrapnel. Boulders often flying through the air, the terrible screams after the second grenade, the wounded or dead, often hidden from sight. It takes unbelievable work to deliver a gun into the mountain and the whole day to lift it upwards with ropes. I was under heavy fire for 8 hours and thought I'd never make it through alive. Austrians against Italians, Kaiserjägers against mountaineers. More dangerous than the enemy was the force of nature. More soldiers died as a result of avalanches, rockfalls and freezing temperatures than of enemy fire.
The winter in the high mountains was particularly bad for the soldiers. During World War II, there were 2 disastrous winters with a great deal of snow. That is to say, it was very dangerous, and especially so for the supply lines. They had to repeatedly move along high and steep slopes and were hit by avalanches. Sometimes avalanches were even deliberately triggered and buried the enemy supply lines.
Many of the paths along which ammunition and provisions were transported still exist. These were the first climbing paths in the Dolomites. The four have established the Bellum Aquilarum Association, so the history of the mountain front will not be forgotten. At the Croda Rossa, caverns blown into the rock face that soldiers used for shelter are crumbling away. For months, the troops were stuck at 2,000 feet. In winter, they often had to endure days without food because the snow blocked the supply lines. The only food they had was canned goods. This barrack room would have been shared between more than 30 soldiers, and it feels as if it were only yesterday. Sigrid's great-grandfather described the conditions in his diary. 3rd of July, 1915. Lice as big as frogs. Not a wink of sleep. The lice torment us more than the Italians. Our commanders are drunk and we have to go hungry. We've been given a Maggi soup, which even the dogs wouldn't have eaten.
This really touches me, because when looking at the remnants here, you realize how uncomfortable it was and how confined the space was for the soldiers. If their clothes were wet, you can imagine how damp it would be. So it was very, very humid. And because of this, many soldiers developed rheumatism, the #1 disease.
30th of May, 1918. And home. Peacetime. Pilot Gabriel Kostner has to hurry. He's flying snow cannons up onto the slopes that are ski slopes in winter. It's late autumn and the weather is changeable. Without artificial snow, skiing would be impossible in the Dolomites. It takes hundreds of snow cannons. The approaching twists of fog are worrying the men.
In the mountains, cloud forms very quickly, and if you have a long rope, clouds can have serious consequences because you just lose sight.
For the pilot, this is a situation that shows him his own limits.
Fear is very important because it tells you that if you go too far and are in a situation where the machine will no longer do what you ask it to, then it's time to pull back. Fear for me is very important. It's a warning light you know should not be on.
In winter, South Tyrol is dependent on ski tourism, with snow and sunshine being essential for business. In the Dolomites alone, there are more than 1,000 kilometers of slopes. Emergency doctor Lydia Rauch and the Alpine rescue team are in constant demand. Every year, the number of serious skiing accidents rises.
I was incredibly surprised at the potential for accidents on the ski slopes, because the skiers are incredibly fast, and the rate of injuries is almost comparable in number to motorcycle accidents. If it's really freezing cold, the intravenous drips also freeze. The batteries suffer. You lose sensation in your hands. This all makes it insanely difficult.
Every mission is a reminder. Mountains demand respect.
What really holds the Alpine together is our passion for mountain rescue, our enthusiasm for the mountains and idealism in the glue that binds us. And I really hope that stays with us.